certain arguments that your opponent makes, and then take advantage of them. And you place conditions on what your opponent can do, and make their job more difficult. Okay? So that's sort of a general explanation of what it is. Before we do that, we just want to give you a tip about how to approach the round generally, like your thought process going into the round, specifically in terms of how you flow, and then from how you flow into the types of arguments that you generate. So what we call the type of flowing that we're encouraging is non-linear flowing, which is a fancy name, but all it really means is that when you flow, you should not take the arrangement of arguments that your opponent presents in it, and as the way in which you should respond to them.
Well, you should flow linearly, like as you hear it, but you should think about the flow in terms of importance of arguments, not the temporal occurrence in which they were uttered. So you don't necessarily respond to or think about the first argument first. And this matters in terms of hijacking, because when you want to say yes to an argument and use it for your advantage, it's obviously going to be an important argument. You don't necessarily want to save that towards the end if the hijackable argument is at the bottom. So when thinking about hijacking, you should think about the flow nonlinearly.
Right, and also sometimes you may want to couple responses, so you may need to make an argument at the very top of the case and an argument at the very bottom of the case that will win you the round. But I obviously don't want to risk running out of time before you get to the bottom to couple that with the response at the top, right? Does that make sense to everyone?
So what is your name? Can you describe why one would not want to think about the flow in a linear fashion?
Because I guess the funny might not attack it in order, like from the way you're thinking of the way that Hijacking might like attack it in order.
Well, it is true that they will make different arguments on different parts of the case, but why would you maybe not want to respond to the arguments in the order in which they are said? Can anyone help him out?
Sorry, go ahead.
You want to make sure that you're addressing all the important arguments first, and then if you don't have time, it won't matter as much because you have less important arguments there for the list.
Right, so the temporal organization, or the way in which it was presented, is not equivalent to the significance of the argument, right? You obviously want to be winning most of the arguments.
So do you want to take another shot at the question? But can you take a shot at the question?
Because, and they are not.
They're the most relevant things to face.
And so, the additional point that we're looking for is that, and they do not come in that order, in the way in which you're going to. Alright, is that good? What's your name? Could you explain that one more time?
The order that the arguments were given is instead the order you want to attack them.
Right. Okay.
And why would that matter for hijacking, or thinking about hijacking arguments?
Because according to your case, some things may not be as relevant as others.
The ones you want to hijack?
So, we want to explain the layers of the debate as we're dividing it up, because those layers reinforce and are dependent on one another in a specific order, and also so that you can isolate the advantages of hijacking certain parts of the debate, and also hijacking them in conjunction with one another, so that you understand the relationship between the three levels. So 3 levels that we've divided every case, or every case into are the definitions, the standards, and contention or contentions. All right, and we'll explain those as we go. But before we get to those, we want to just talk generally about the form of arguments. So, do you want to explain the 3 parts of an argument?
The first part of a case generally is the definitions. As you will see when you debate, or if you've already debated, the first thing you start flowing, or you start to hear, is how your opponent defines particular terms in the resolution. And as you probably learned in your resolutional interpretation lecture, they're not random. They actually influence what arguments are relevant in the round. They influence what arguments are important and they influence how you should interpret the resolution. So they're huge.
No, that's good. And so in the standard, just briefly, and we're going to go more in depth in this later, but the standard essentially tells you which arguments are most important and allows you to filter which arguments matter in the round. And so your contentions are supposed to link back to or interact with your standard. Yeah. And so there should be a special relationship or a coherent relationship between the two, right?
Okay, so can someone explain how might definitions and standards be interrelated and dependent on each other? How about you in the redemption shirt?
Pretty much like the definitions you're choosing to interpret the resolution is going to set up your standard that you're going to be using for your case that is going to need to be linked back for your contention.
I think so. Can someone else add on to that, clarify that, clean it up? Facebook got like a boss, man.
I was taking what was he talking?
So he was explaining the relationship between the standard and the definition. You choose the definition.
Can you describe what definitions do?
I was just trying to.
Well, what do your notes say about what definitions do in a case?
I wasn't. I don't know.
We'll come back to you.
You have an answer?
The definitions for each term sets the guidelines for what you have to prove through the resolution, or through your case.
Okay, so then, can you explain how definitions and standards are interrelated?
Well, standards.
Okay, who would like to help him out? What do standards do?
Like standards like the value criterion?
Yes.
Okay. Like how they relate to definitions or?
How
specific-
they're dependent upon the definitions.
Oh, well, the definitions are basically stating how you are interpreting the resolution by what words mean, and so that's going to influence what your standards and all your contentions are. It's going to influence your entire case based on, so like your standard is going to be written to match what you define these words to be.
Okay,
I guess.
so can you tell me what he said in your own words?
Well, the definitions influence everything in the case, right?
Well, how do they influence your standards particularly?
When you choose your standards are dependent upon how you interpret it.
What do you mean by dependent on how you interpret? What do you mean by interpret?
How you define the words.
So your standard is dependent on
I
how
mean,
you.
the resolution.
All right, so let's I think you're getting there. Let's start with like a simple example. So you're all familiar with like a value. Okay, so how might you go about choosing what the value would be on this topic? What would you look to first? Yeah.
The resolution?
Okay, good. And so what do you guys think was the most common value on this topic? Okay. Well, so that all seemed very quick, right? You guys all gave a quick response, right? Well, so that's all we're trying to get you to do and understand through our explication of the definition and the standard, right? The way you conceive of the standard is oftentimes comes from the way you justify your arguments in terms of the relation to the text of the resolution. Does that make sense? So basically, the text of the resolution filters and determines which arguments matter or don't matter. And so they obviously have a huge importance to play, a huge important role to play.
Girl with the glasses and the striped blue shirt, can you repeat what Tyler just said for everyone?
What is the important part to how you determine your standard?
What did you say? Can you speak up?
Words play an important part on how you determine your standard.
Okay.
What words? Not just any words.
you know, okay, the resolution, words in the resolution.
And then, so we just explained briefly the definitions, the standard, and the contingent, right? So does everyone have a basic understanding of that division that we've made? All right, so let's just go into the hijacking part. We want to teach you generally how to make offensive and defensive responses, right? And then after this, we're going to apply that to the 3 levels. And if there are any unclear things about the structure or the division that we just made, you can ask those questions there as well. But hopefully the examples will clear. Okay, so can anyone tell me what an offensive argument is? Not like an offensive argument, but an offensive argument. So no one say anything rude.
An argument we use like in games. It's like an argument that you use to uphold your own case, but it's not like defending your case. It's like showing how your case is like relevant.
Well, what do you mean by your case? Like the case that you wrote and printed out, or your side?
Your side, your case, whatever you're trying to promote, like whatever side you're on.
So your side.
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, can you explain what an offensive argument is?
Whatever you're trying to promote in your case. Okay,
So what does that mean to promote your case?
white shirt? White shirt with nothing on it.
It's a reason to vote for your side. So like an offensive argument for the act would be like a reason to affirm.
Okay, perfect, right? That's how, don't even write down that definition verbatim, right? An offensive argument is a reason to vote for you. It's just like in any sport, right? An offensive argument is why you win the game. You can't win a basketball game without scoring any points. You do need defense. You have to have reasons to vote for you or reasons why you win, right? So,
Can someone explain what a defensive response is?
Explaining why the opponent's attacks on your case are either irrelevant or small enough that your case can still survive and still win.
so you could make defensive responses against the attacks your opponent makes on your case. Suppose you are attacking your opponent's case. What would a defensive response be? Does that question make sense?
So from my viewpoint, I'm attacking and then I'm also making a defensive statement.
Yes,
Yeah.
those are the same. You are attacking in a way that makes defensive responses.
I think there needs to be a distinction between like being defensive and being defensive, you know, like defending yourself versus
Yeah.
like, making defensive.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So think about it in terms of how we just couched offensive. Think about it in terms of sports.
A defensive argument is a reason not to vote for the other side.
Right.
Can you repeat what he said?
A defensive argument is reasons why you shouldn't vote for the other side.
So if you,
So like in a basketball game, what would that be?
It'd be like preventing the other team from scoring.
Right. And it doesn't necessarily, or usually, or typically win you the round, but it is necessary, right? Because you don't, it's like in basketball, you don't just score and then let your opponent run out the court and dunk, right? Seems like a poor strategy. So can you explain the distinction, both?
So an offensive argument, not offensive, argument is something, a reason to why the judge would actually vote for you. And a defensive argument is simply why your opponent is wrong and why your judge shouldn't listen to what your opponent's saying.
Not necessarily why they're wrong,
But
well, it does mean that they are wrong, but why that's wrong just means that you don't vote for them. There are reasons not to vote for your opponent. Okay? Alright, that sounds good. So, let's talk about terms, which are where we're going to start for how to hijack things. How to take what your opponent has and make it yours.
we're first going to talk about generally the structure of a turn, not a turn in any particular part. And And the reason why we're starting there is because they're the most common form of hijacking in debate. So even if you're a novice, this is a good place to start for you.
Okay, so, let's talk about linking. All right, so in any argument, or in most arguments, there is a link and an impact, right? This is separate from, you don't have to think about this in the debate sense. You just have to think about it generally. So, for instance, the link is what, just very vaguely, what something does, and the impact is why it matters. So, here's an example. And we're going to turn it, in other words, so we probably should have said this, but whenever you turn something, you take your opponent's offense, in other words, reasons to vote for them, and make it your offense. So it's now reasons to vote for you. So can someone explain why that would be strategic?
So like, for like an analogy, it's kind of like jujitsu or aikido, where you take your opponent's energy and you turn it into your own, you force them on the ground. That means,
Sure.
like at least like a physical analogy.
Sounds good. So here's our example. Monica will go see the Avengers, and it will make her very happy. So
Who can name the link in that argument? How about you? Can someone help her out? White shirt with something on it.
Monica seeing the Avengers?
okay, right?
So the link is, do you know why it's the link? Can someone explain to her why it's the link?
It's what you do.
It's sort of the thing that is happening, right? And then there's another part that evaluates, or that is a result of that thing happening, and your opponent or you will say that that is good or bad. So can someone tell us what the impact would be? You with the Dell.
It would be the importance of why it's such a huge topic.
Why it's such a huge what, sorry?
Why it would be such a huge topic.
Oh, well, in this example, Monica will go see the Avengers and will make her happy.
The impact of that is
Good. So, so we've come up with a link turn and an impact turn. And we're going to do an example. And then after that, you're going to do an example. Okay? So, the link turn is Monica will go see the Avengers and it will make her unhappy.
Can someone explain the difference between the original statement and this turn to the original statement? What do we call them? You. Yes.
Well, I guess the impact changes, you're unhappy instead of happy at the end of it.
Yes, but so what we're sort of trying to get at, that's right, but sort of the impact is still happiness, right? The thing that has changed is not really whether or not happiness matters, but what happens as a result of her going to the movie. Does that make sense? Did anyone understand what I just said? Okay, you're nodding, so go for it.
Oh, okay, so, like, she's still watching the movie, so, like, the link is still happening, but you're taking the link, it's like, if her being happy would be affirming the resolution, then you want to negate the resolution and make her sad, the opposite of affirming.
We don't want to make her sad.
Or, I
you
mean,
want to say that
she
the
becomes sad.
resolutional action would make her sad, right?
So the link results in the opposite impact you had initially wanted. But the impact of happiness or whatever, the judgment of being happy is the same.
So you still care about the impact in the same way. Does that make sense? We all agree under this interpretation that happiness is good. The issue is what?
Yes.
The issue is what?
In terms of
So Monica will go see the Avengers and will make her unhappy. Both sides agree Monica's happiness is of significant importance. So what is the issue?
The issue is that
Yeah, so it's whether or not, right, and specifically, the movie causes her to be happy, right? Is that clear to you, the Arizona team? So can you explain?
Oh, well, did you want the impact or did you want?
Well, we would like you to explain what is the same, what features are the same in the two arguments and what features are different.
Well, the link is the same, but her going to the movie is the result, whether she's happy or unhappy.
Do we still care? So, okay.
Did you want to say something? Yeah, you did. You raised your hand. What did you want to say?
I just wanted to, I thought she didn't understand, so I didn't like explain it.
You thought what?
I thought she didn't explain, didn't understand it, so I just wanted to like explain it.
Go ahead
Well,
and
you
explain
can
it.
explain it anyway.
Oh, like, her happiness, like, matters, but in terms of, like, what the movie does to her, that is what changes.
Right. Okay, good.
Perfect.
So now it's time for an impact turn. Instead of giving me an example, y'all seem like you're up on this. Can someone explain what the impact turn would be?
Monica doesn't go to the movies and it makes her happy.
No. Can anyone?
Does make her unhappy and happy because the impacts.
Good guess. Good guess. Not quite. Yeah.
Do you mean like she goes to the movies and it makes her happy, but her happiness is bad?
Exactly.
The first response is, so the first response of Monica doesn't go to the movies. Can anyone explain why that wouldn't be a turn?
The link is changing instead of the impact is.
Changing is sort of an odd word.
Well, he is saying that the link is different, something else happens in the link, that's true. Is he necessary, is that argument that I just didn't go to the movies so nothing happened, would that make the opposite result? Would that make any, does that have any implication on whether I'm happy or unhappy
And
in
yeah, and
terms
would
of
it
the actual argument,
and would it prove that Monica ought or ought not go to the movie?
in terms of my happiness? So is that,
So why not?
Well, well, if you're going to the movie and you're happy, it doesn't mean that you can't be happy by not going to the movie.
Yeah. So quickly, what would a link turn look like here? We're going back a step above. What would the link turn look like? And why is Monica not going to the movie not a link turn?
A link term would just be an argument against the first statement, as opposed to keeping the link and changing it.
An argument against what?
The first statement. It's saying,
Argument against the first. So what do you mean by the
that's
first?
saying Monica will go to the movies and she'll be like, or Monica will see the Avengers and she'll be very happy. Saying Monica didn't go to the movies, it's just arguing against that first statement.
yes, exactly, it's just arguing against the first statement, so it's not exactly hijacking anything, right? So would that argument be defensive or offensive?
Offensive. Because they're directly contradicting it.
But is,
Yeah. Because it's a reason not to vote for them.
but,
Sort of an offensive, defensive argument because you attack their case, but in a way that doesn't help you necessarily, but that harms them in terms of
so it's saying that because one part is untrue, it responds to their argument, but there's no reason why your argument.
Right, exactly.
So, blue polo,
Ryan?
Ryan, can you explain why offense, defense?
I was thinking offense, I guess, because it's going directly against their case, and it's kind of saying that my opponent is wrong.
But do all arguments that go against someone's case necessarily mean it's a reason to vote for you?
It depends on the argument, like I guess in, say, this situation, if you're saying one thing, I'm saying the other thing, then one reason why you should vote for me is because I'm proving my opponent wrong, maybe.
So it does depend on like what sort of burden you set on yourself and whether or not you have to prove them wrong. But assuming, right, that your goal is to prove that Monica going to the movies will make her unhappy, and you are both concerned with the result of her going to the movie, why would that change things?
Oh, because okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so that would be defensive, because then what you're saying is like my opponent's having it wrong. She actually did go to the movies, and so it's going back to what I'm saying.
Right, and your goal is to prove that Monica going to the movies will make her unhappy, right? You agree that Monica's happiness is important, right? And so you don't want to go off on some sort of different tangent about like, well, Monica doesn't go to movies, she stays inside, right? Like, you want to say, no, actually, the opposite is the case, and that's reasonable, right? Because you wouldn't make, your statement would have nothing to do with Monica's happiness if she didn't go to the movie, right? Does that make sense? Sort of look uncertain.
How about you explain why the argument is defensive?
Because Monica not going to the movie, it's like it results in the opposite impact from not Monica going.
Well, so that's a little bit off. Can you explain? So from what we just told you, can you explain why that might be wrong?
And she said that because it's the opposite impact.
Right. She says Monica not going to the movie causes the opposite impact.
Well, the first thing is there's not necessarily anything to really prove that, because that's not the topic really. I guess like as far as that is, but also like if we're determining Monica's happiness by her going to the movies, if she doesn't go to the movies, then that's not what we're determining. Then we're determining something else.
Right. We're determining Monica's happiness in terms of
Going to the movies.
right. Does that make sense? Cool.
So can you, do you want to take another shot at it?
So basically, if we're gonna determine your happiness in terms of going to the movies, and saying you're not going to the movie, you can't really say determine how.
Right. It sort of makes that debate irresolvable, or at the very least, not concerned with happiness, which we're assuming that you're agreeing with that. All right. So let's give our example. I think you said it earlier, but we'll just reiterate since it seems like it's been a while. So an impact term would be using the same mini like fake resolution we're using. Monica being happy is actually a bad thing, right? And that would be a reason to vote for you. Why? Which argument do you agree to? Which part of the argument? Well, so the original claim was Monica going to the movie will make her happy. And you say Monica going to the movie will make her happy, and that is a bad thing.
So what's
So I'm sorry, so sort of like in parentheses in the first one is that, and that happiness is good. So what do you agree?
You don't.
You don't what?
You don't agree to it.
Well, so
which part do you not agree to?
okay, so which part do you agree with? The what?
The last part of the sentence?
The last part. What is the last part?
What are you trying to get me to say?
Well, we can't tell you. No, we're trying to ask, so at the very end of the sentence is the part that says, or the first part of the sentence is, Monica will go see the Avengers, and that will make her happy.
And that is a good thing.
Right. We agree that happiness is the impact, right? The impact that both sides were originally trying to reach, right? Because originally the debate that we were discussing was whether or not going to the movie would be beneficial or not for Monica's happiness, right? And both agreed that the impact was a good thing, or something that we should do, right? So in the case of an impact term, the debate's a little bit different, right? What is different about that debate?
Her happiness is a good thing or a bad thing.
Okay, right. So what does that mean that an impact term must concede? You go ahead. The impact is happiness. Right. But we're saying, what would the impact turn have to concede? Okay, can you do it for us?
Then Monica is
Yes,
yes.
yes.
Um,
The impact turn concedes that I am happy.
yes, right.
Okay, so Nike shirt, can you explain what an impact turn, what that particular impact turn concedes? So the thing that stays the same is the concession, the impact that I am happy thing. But what is different? How is the impact treated in the original statement versus the second statement?
The desirable outcome is bad instead of good. Like, we both agree that she's going to be happy, but one's saying that being happy is bad in that situation.
So you allow your opponent to have all the access they want to their impact, right? Fine, Monica is as happy as she will ever be after seeing the Avengers, all right? Even though it's a terrible movie.
You're in my presence and you said that?
But what we do change is the fact that, so she's super happy after she saw the Avengers. But what changes is that her happiness is no longer a good thing. Because for some reason, Monica being happy would be detrimental to the world. For some reason that you would give, right? So let's conclude this section. Someone explain to me, if someone nails it right here, we'll move on. The difference between a link and an impact turn, and then the link, and then explain the link turn in the Monica example, and then explain the impact turn in the Monica example.
Arrow shirt in the light blue.
So, no one explaining everything? The link is that what's happening, and the impact is what's going to happen if she goes to the movies. I mean, yeah. And then the impact turn is if it's good that she's going to be happy going to the Avengers or not. I mean, if it's good that she's going to be happy going to the Avengers, and if her being happy is good or bad.
Good. Great. So let's apply these arguments.
We are not done with turns yet.
Oh, you're right.
We're going to read you an example of a link and impact, and you are going to label turns for us. You are going to help us label turns.
Okay. So we're going to make a few turns. Fortunately for you, they're all based on Harry Potter. So hopefully you'll enjoy them, because we're Harry Potter nerds, and hopefully you are as well. So, here's our mini Harry Potter resolution. Everyone listen, and you write this down if you need to.
Harry trusting Professor Snape will lead to the destruction of Voldemort.
So, imagine that was the affirmative case, all right? And here is our negative response to that case. Ready? You should write these down, or at least remember them. By that I mean write them down. Ready? First, turn. The destruction of Voldemort is bad, as Voldemort's obsession with immortality would lead to cures for many diseases and save more lives. Turn. The destruction of Voldemort is bad, because Voldemort's obsession with immortality would lead to cures for many diseases and save more lives.
What was the original?
Harry Potter trusting Snape will lead to destruction.
So who can tell me the link in the example?
Excellent.
Who can tell me the impact of red shirt?
Destruction of Voldemort.
Right. And so, what type of turn is this?
Well, you can't just say it, you have to justify it.
There's some disagreement here.
So I would say an impact term because they're saying that the destruction of Voldemort would be bad. I guess it was originally applied to a good thing.
That's exactly right.
Excellent. So,
Someone said link over here. Who said link, be honest?
Goes in right here.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make you unanswer. Can you explain what she just said?
Because Meg agrees that Harry trusts in Professor Snape will lead to the destruction of Voldemort, but he states that happening would be bad, and so
Right. And so, I'm not sure if we've said this, but essentially what you've done is let your opponent have their way. What they've actually done is a bad thing. Or the bad thing they said would occur is actually a good thing. Right? Does that make sense?
so the judgment of the impact is the opposite.
Right. Number 2. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm kind of confused, like,
Yeah.
this, what exactly is the link turn? Like, how are you showing?
Who can tell him what a link turn is?
Is that your question, or are you asking what is the link term in this resolution?
No, like, what is the link turn? It's kind of confused in terms of like.
Okay, sure.
Harry does not trust me.
Well, so you want to know what a link turn is, Jim?
Yeah,
right?
like, it's the opposite of the original term.
So like Harry should trust Snape, but Harry should not trust Snape.
Or he doesn't.
And what? You have to say and something, right? Think about the other half of the yarn. What's the second half? Something.
Would a link term be Harry not trusting?
Now just tell us what a link term is.
I guess changing the link, but it has to be the same.
Right. Changing, yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
So
Changing
like-
the link and the impact is the
So
same.
like link is.
Okay, so I think the issue here is that the examples we're using are literally one sentence, but in a larger argument, I guess it makes more sense. So imagine you have an argument and there's a claim, and there's a pretty long warrant, or a link, and then there's an impact. A link turn would say that what happens in this big middle part actually results in the opposite of the impact. So there's something different about the link that results in the opposite impact.
So, what we should say is that the evaluation of the impact remains the same, but what causes the impact or what does not cause the impact is the opposite. So, like, what's a good example? Like,
Let's say you made the claim that driving a hybrid is environmentally friendly and will save the environment. And your warrant for that is that driving a hybrid means you use less gasoline, which means there's less carbon in the environment. So the entire argument is driving a hybrid is great for the environment. The reason why that's true is because your car uses less gas and so less carbon dioxide goes into the environment, thus you save the environment. So I have someone here.
So maybe like is a link thing where you achieve the same impact just in a different way.
I think here's what happens, and it's the value range.
it's the one.
It's the value range.
So a link turn can, a link turn to that argument, I'll just start off with an example. A link turn to the argument I just made is that buying a hybrid doesn't lead to saving the environment because in actuality, you're not saving gas because you are overestimating how much gas you're saving, so you drive around a lot and you actually end up using so much gas that you ruin the environment. Can someone explain what is different in those, what the response does to the original argument?
That the impact turn there changes the impact somehow. So what the link turn does is it doesn't change the link at all, but it changes the impact. And so it'll flip.
So it's like saying that what,
So it's kind of a weird way to put it, but a link turn isn't really a link turn. It changes the impact. So a link turn affects the impact, and an impact turn affects the way we judge that impact. So does that kind of
Right, so I think another way of saying that is that the link, well, what were you saying?
What?
What were you saying?
Well, what I do like about that answer is that the impact turn is perfect. I think that that's a perfect, concise description of what an impact turn is. And if you didn't hear, what he said was, an impact turn is that the judgment of what happens in the impact is the opposite. So if the impact you say is good and your opponent says it's bad, or the judgment of that impact is bad, then that would be an impact turn. What I think needs a little revision is the link turn part, because it's not that the link remains perfectly intact, because you're trying to make the argument that the opposite impact happens, and obviously that requires changing some parts of the link.
Right, so the same event occurs, right? So Monica still goes to the movie. What changes is the relationship between going to the movie and what we care about, the impact, right? Is that more clear?
Yeah, but is that still part of the link, like the relationship part between Monica and her sort of reaction, or her reaction to the movie? Is that still part of the link?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not just the action of going. It's
Right, it's the action of going in relationship to the impact. Right, the link and the impact have to be related, right? And in this case, we're saying there's a relationship between the way, what happens when Monica goes to the movie and her overall happiness, which matters, which is the impact.
So a link turn says that there is something about the link that is not being accounted for that results, and this is the important part that actually makes it a turn, that results in the opposite impact occurring. So something, if you're maximizing something, you're actually decreasing something. If you are happy, you actually get sad. And so in the example that we gave you of, my going to see the Avengers and being resultantly actually unhappy is not, yes, the important part is that the impact changed, but what is obviously not, what you're not privy to is why that changed, and it could be for a number of reasons.
so like the link turn, the objective of the link turn is to prove your opponent's impact false, like your opponent's analysis or their impact false, and show what it really does.
Not quite that the impact is false, but
Just
that,
not true.
but that it has a different relationship with what? Do you see that? Can you explain that? Is that clear?
So it's like when alright, so someone says like the link or something, like when she goes to the movie, she's happy or something, then like when you have the link, when you turn the link on itself, and it's like you're saying like the opposite happens. So if they say that she's happy when she goes to the movie, or like if your opponent says Monica's happy when she goes to the movies, but then you say that when she goes to the movie she actually isn't happy, then that's kind of the link turn.
Yes.
Okay, so
Exactly.
it like flips the impact around. Kind of.
Yeah. What do you mean by
Flips the
flip?
impact around just makes it a little confusing. I mean, you obviously understand up to that point what you explained makes sense. When you say flips the impact around, I think you could say that in a more clear way, right? It's sort of that one person has access to the impact and the other one doesn't. Or one person's argument does not have the same relationship with the impact in the way that they want it to. If that's what you mean by flip the impact, then I think that's good. Your explanation up to say flip the impact is very good.
Yes.
I think it's better to think of it as in what you're conceding. Like with an impact turn, you're conceding the link and the impact.
Right.
But the concept that is being judged is what you're changing. And then with a link turn, you're conceding the link and the concept that is being judged, but you're saying that the impact is not true in what they're saying.
So the link,
But like, isn't there that creates the opposite impact? You can
Yes.
change it just a little bit?
Yes.
So we should move away from this seemingly prevalent thinking that a link turn is, well, we grant the link and the impact is the opposite, because that wouldn't really make sense in a real round if someone read an entire contention and you concede every single warrant in that contention, but just say, actually, I think the opposite impact happens. Obviously, you have to give a reason why the opposite impact occurs if the first part of the link happens, like if I do go to the movies. There needs to be a reason why the movies made me unhappy. And as such, there needs to be a sort of modification of the original link in order for that link turn to be a successful turn, in order for that argument to successfully change which way the impact goes. Can you explain that better?
Again?
No, the,
3.
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, we need to, like, when the impact changes, we need to see some, like, change in the link that leads to that change. Like, when you go to the movies, the movie was bad, so that's why you're not.
Okay. So, I don't want to hold you all too late, but we do want to talk just a minute about definitions. So, we've explained, so we've explained the general structure of arguments and how to hijack an argument in general. Those arguments are generally conceived of a contingent, a link turn and an impact turn. This is generally how it happens in a round, right? And then after those arguments are decided in terms of who is winning, or if there is a link turn, or if there is an impact turn, those arguments function in relation to the standard. Okay? And the standard says, well, it would say something like increasing Monica's happiness, or something like that. Or, I don't know, yeah, fostering happy moviegoers. But, so that's how we want you to apply those arguments, is in relationship back to your standard. But obviously, before that occurs, there's another layer of the debate. The conditions, what can happen to that argument. There are 2 layers. There's the definitions and the standard. We'll briefly talk about definitions, and if we don't get the standard, then we can talk about it later, or you can come talk to us in office hours. Does that sound good? So hopefully this is just, sorry. So hopefully this is just a reiteration of things learned in resolution interpretations. But essentially what we want you to think of definitions as, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is determining what arguments you get access to make. And obviously defining a definition, or defining a word one way, and defining a word in another way, has a completely different impact on the word. So can someone briefly explain why that's the case?
So I guess for the the domestic violence topic, if you define deadly force as something that definitively kills somebody, then you have access to arguments that say killing is bad. But if you define, if your opponent defines deadly force as something that does not definitely kill them, you can't necessarily make those links to killing is bad because you don't necessarily kill them.
Okay, and so who might it be strategic for to define it as deadly force as not necessarily resulting in a death?
The affirmative side.
Right, so why would that be the case? Someone else?
Gray shirt.
Maybe?
Do?
So, like, why be important for like, give an example or why?
No, using that example.
Okay. So,
So, sorry, so let me make sure the question is clear. We said, the deadly force, right? Suppose deadly force means not necessarily resulting in a death. I asked who would that be beneficial for, and someone said the F. Why would that be the case?
Okay, so like the negative could like bring up a moral theory saying how killing is always wrong in every situation. But if the affirmative says that well deadly force isn't always killing, and that moral theory brought up of like how killing is always immoral would be irrelevant.
I think it's right. If the NC is completely focused on like you can never kill, you can never kill, you can never kill, well, maybe the affirmative has specified in the top of their case that deadly force does not mean that you kill someone, right? It just means that you harm them greatly. And unfortunately for the negative, they didn't answer that, and that means their negative case doesn't matter, right? So if you're the negative, which definition for deadly force should you not choose?
The one we just discussed?
One that doesn't result in death.
Right.
Okay, so what happens if the negative case that you're debating does have that definition, and they do make the argument that killing is bad? What would you do in that situation? What?
Counter definition?
Well, let's say the negative makes the argument that deadly force means that you have serious bodily injury, but the negative case argues that killing is really bad.
They don't link into the resolution because the resolution doesn't necessary.
So the two things to take from this under definitions are, one, you can screw yourself over if you define it in a poor way or a way that interacts badly with the rest of your case. Whether that be your standard or the way we were talking was mostly contention, right? So you can't, or, well, I guess it was both. So like, if your standard in your negative case is stopping death or something like that, you obviously wouldn't want to define deadly force in that way. And conversely, if you're the affirmative, you do want the negative to screw themselves over, or you can do it for them and define deadly force as force which is not, or which only has the potential to kill, and which doesn't result in death. All right?
So before you pack up to leave, we will make sure that you understand those two things, sir. Yeah. Can someone explain the first way, or the first thing Tyler said, of the two things that he said? What am I not?
About definitions,
Yes.
you determine what arguments you have access to making based on definition.
And given the example we just gave you, what are the two important lessons from that example?
Basically, you just want to be careful about what definitions you provide in your case, make sure they don't contradict or leave any like spaces that could be exploited by the opposite side.
And not only that, right? Be assertive about it.
Yeah.
Right? Go out and try to find a definition that will work, that will work in your favor and against your opponent, right? Just like tread cautiously, try not to make any contradictions. Obviously do that, right? But in addition to that, take arguments that you think will help you out, or definitions that you think will help you out. Was that the first one? Well, they work with. So we'll leave it there. If y'all need to come talk to us, we'll be in office hours.
I'm on the 22nd floor, he's on 11th floor.
Right. Sound good?